In October 1996, Gabriela Sabatini walked into a New York press conference and ended a life that millions of people thought she would never leave. She was only 26. There was no farewell season, no long countdown, and no final attempt to reclaim the trophies that had once seemed destined for her. One of the most admired athletes in the world simply admitted that she no longer wanted to keep going. For those who remember watching Gabriela under the lights of the US Open, that decision can still feel difficult to understand. She had the powerful topspin forehand, the elegant one-handed backhand, and the quiet presence that made crowds lean closer whenever she stepped onto a court. She had defeated Steffi Graf in a Grand Slam final. She had carried Argentina's flag at the Olympic Games. She had spent years among the best players alive. Then, at an age when many champions are entering their prime, she disappeared from professional tennis. What happened after that announcement reveals more about Gabriela Sabatini than any championship trophy ever could. And as we follow the life she built after the applause ended, consider subscribing and giving this video a like. Stories like Gabriela's belong to a generation of sports fans who remember not only the scores, but how those moments felt. The public saw her retirement as sudden. For Gabriela, it had been approaching quietly. By 1996, she had lived on the professional tour for roughly 12 years. Airports, hotels, training sessions, interviews, expectations, injuries, and constant attention had occupied almost half her life. She later explained that she would wake in the morning knowing she had to practice, while feeling that she no longer wanted to. She spoke with a psychologist and gradually accepted a conclusion that many elite athletes are afraid to face, continuing simply because others expected it would not make her happy. She was not walking away because she had stopped caring about tennis. She was walking away because tennis had consumed nearly everything else. Sabatini had always appeared composed in public, but fame never came naturally to her. As a young player, she was deeply introverted. Her English was limited, and international press conferences could feel more frightening than the matches themselves. Years later, she admitted that during some semi-finals, the thought of having to speak to reporters after reaching the final affected her concentration. She did not intentionally lose, but anxiety sometimes weakened her at the very moment she needed to become strongest. That confession changed the way many people understood her career. Fans had watched a graceful champion competing against Graf, Martina Navratilova, Monica Seles, Arantxa Sanchez Vicario, and other giants of an extraordinary era. What they could not see was the shy young woman trying to survive the attention surrounding her. Every victory created another interview. Every successful tournament brought larger crowds. Every photograph made her more recognizable in airports, restaurants, and hotel lobbies. The qualities that made the public love her, her reserve, dignity, and gentleness, also made the machinery of fame exhausting. Retirement gave her something she had barely known since childhood: control of her own time. She did not fall into the emptiness that troubles many athletes after competition. Gabriela already had another part of her life waiting. Her fragrance line, first introduced in 1989, had become an international business. With support from her father Osvaldo, who had worked as an executive for General Motors, she expanded her commercial interests beyond tennis. The perfume bearing her name allowed her to remain connected to the public, without living according to rankings, tournament schedules, or the result of the next match. There was also a quieter transformation taking place. The woman who had spent her adolescence being observed began protecting her privacy. She traveled, exercised, cycled, ran, and swam. She became more selective about public appearances and learned to set boundaries that had been almost impossible during her playing years. When she reflected on turning 50, she said she felt healthy, grateful, and happy with the life she had created. Age did not frighten her. It gave her permission to decide which obligations mattered and which ones she could finally refuse. Yet she never abandoned the sport completely. In 2006, 10 years after her retirement, Gabriela entered the International Tennis Hall of Fame. The person who presented her was Steffi Graf, the opponent connected to nearly every great triumph and painful defeat of her career. Graf had beaten her in the 1988 US Open final, the Olympic gold medal match in Seoul, and the unforgettable 1991 Wimbledon final. Gabriela had answered with one of the defining victories of her generation, defeating Graf 6-2, 7-6 in the 1990 US Open final. Their rivalry had once been measured in scoreboards. In retirement, it became a friendship. By 2026, Gabriela was no longer hiding from tennis. At 56, she appeared at tournaments, supported charitable causes, and served as an ambassador for the Roland Garros Junior Series in South America. She spoke to young players about discipline, perseverance, humility, and the difficult moments that arrive long before anyone lifts a trophy. Her role had changed. She was no longer the teenager carrying the expectations of Argentina. She was helping another generation understand the journey she had survived. But to understand why freedom became so important to Gabriela Sabatini, we must return to Buenos Aires, to a little girl who began playing tennis at 6 years old and became so talented that childhood started slipping away before she could recognize what she was losing. Long before Gabriela Sabatini learned how to escape the attention surrounding her, she had to survive becoming famous while she was still a child. She was born in Buenos Aires on May 16, 1970, the daughter of Osvaldo and Beatriz Sabatini. Her father worked as an executive for General Motors, and the family lived far from the glamorous image that would later surround Gabriela on the international tennis circuit. There were no generations of champions preparing her for the professional game. Tennis entered her life simply when she began playing at the age of 6. The talent appeared almost immediately. At 8, Gabriela won her first tournament. She already possessed unusual timing and an instinctive understanding of the court, but the child holding the racket was very different from the fearless competitor people would later imagine. She was quiet, uncomfortable around strangers, and happiest when she could express herself without speaking. Tennis gave her that possibility. On the court, she did not have to explain what she was thinking. She could communicate through movement, placement, and the sound of the ball leaving her strings. Her forehand carried heavy topspin. Her one-handed backhand gave her game an elegance that became increasingly rare as women's tennis grew faster and more physical. Even as a young girl, she did not play like someone merely trying to keep the ball in court. She constructed points. Adults soon understood that this was not ordinary childhood talent. At 13, Gabriela won the prestigious Orange Bowl in Florida, becoming one of the youngest champions in the tournament's history. In 1984, she won the girls' singles title at the French Open and reached the top of the junior rankings. The International Tennis Federation named her its junior world champion. Each victory brought her closer to the professional tour. It also carried her further from a normal adolescence. While other girls her age were developing friendships, attending school events, and discovering who they were away from adult expectations, Gabriela was learning how to travel internationally, face experienced opponents, and represent an entire country. Her days became organized around practice sessions, physical preparation, tournament schedules, and results. The world saw a gifted teenager rising unusually quickly. Her family saw how much that rise demanded. Gabriela turned professional in January 1985. Only months later, shortly after her 15th birthday, she arrived at Roland Garros and produced one of the first great surprises of her career. She defeated 4th-seeded Manuela Maliva in the quarter-finals and became one of the youngest players ever to reach the women's semi-finals in Paris. Waiting there was Chris Evert. For American viewers, Evert represented almost everything established and familiar about women's tennis. She was composed, precise, and nearly unbeatable on clay. Gabriela represented the future, a 15-year-old Argentine with flowing dark hair, powerful ground strokes, and a presence that made the audience curious before she had even won a major title. Evert defeated her 6-4, 6-1, and went on to win the championship. But Gabriela had already announced herself. The achievement turned her into an international sports figure almost overnight. Back home, Argentina saw more than a promising player. The country saw someone capable of standing beside the greatest names in the sport. Television coverage increased. Reporters followed her. Expectations grew faster than she could emotionally prepare for them. That was when the contradiction at the center of Gabriela's life became impossible to ignore. She loved competing. She hated being watched. Years later, Gabriela revealed just how serious her shyness had once become. As a young player, She sometimes feared advancing because victory meant facing interviews and speaking publicly. There were occasions when the anxiety surrounding what would happen after a match affected how she performed during it. She was not frightened of the opponent across the net. She was frightened of the microphone waiting beside the court. For a teenager playing in foreign countries, the pressure became even greater because she was still learning English. Questions could arrive quickly, delivered by reporters expecting immediate answers. Gabriela worried about making mistakes, saying the wrong thing, or appearing foolish in front of millions of viewers. The public often interpreted her silence as mystery. For Gabriela, it was protection. That difference matters when looking back at her career. The calm expression audiences remember was not evidence that everything came easily. It was the face of a young woman trying to contain pressures she did not yet know how to describe. If you remember watching Gabriela during those early years, give this video a like and subscribe. Many of the most important battles in classic sports were never visible on the scoreboard. Despite those private struggles, her results continued to improve. Later in 1985, Gabriela won her first professional singles title in Tokyo. She entered the world's top 10 before turning 16 and received the WTA's Newcomer of the Year award. In 1986, she reached the Wimbledon semi-finals, where Martina Navratilova stopped her advance. By then, Gabriela was no longer treated as a promising junior. She was expected to win major championships. Her style made her one of the most recognizable players of the era. She could attack with her forehand, change direction with her backhand, and move comfortably on different surfaces. She also possessed a natural grace that reached viewers who did not follow tennis every week. To many fans, she seemed to belong beside Evert, Navratilova, Steffi Graf, and the other established champions. Yet professional tennis was becoming more demanding with every season. The travel was relentless. The ranking system rewarded consistency, leaving little time to step away. A minor injury could affect months of work. A single defeat could become a national disappointment. Gabriela was still a teenager when her performances began being judged as if she were a fully formed adult. Her family remained central to her stability. Her father helped manage the practical side of her career, and her mother accompanied her during important stages of life on tour. Their presence gave her familiarity in places that often felt temporary. Hotel rooms changed, cities changed, opponents changed, family remained. Still, no family could completely shield her from the expectations gathering around her. In 1987, Gabriela reached another French Open semi-final and advanced to the final of the season-ending championships. Steffi Graf defeated her in both events. Graf was only slightly older, but her rise was transforming women's tennis. She played with speed, discipline, and a forehand that could take control of a match within seconds. A rivalry was beginning. It would produce Gabriela's greatest victory, several of her most painful defeats, and a friendship that neither woman could have imagined while they were fighting for the same trophies. By 1988, Gabriela had entered the world's top 5. She was still only 17 when she reached her first Grand Slam singles final at the US Open. Across the net stood Graf, who was chasing one of the rarest achievements in sports history, winning all 4 major tournaments in the same calendar year. Gabriela pushed her through 3 sets. Graf won 6-3, 3-6, 6-1, completing the Grand Slam. A few weeks later, they met again in the Olympic final in Seoul. Gabriela had carried Argentina's flag during the opening ceremony, an honor that revealed how deeply the country had embraced her. She left South Korea with a silver medal after Graf defeated her once more. To the world, Gabriela's future appeared limitless. She had reached a US Open final, earned an Olympic medal, and established herself among the finest players alive before turning 19. But repeated defeats against Graf were creating a question that would follow her for years. Could Gabriela defeat the woman standing between her and history when the match mattered most? The answer would eventually come in New York. Before that triumph, however, Gabriela would have to endure the strange loneliness of being adored by millions while still struggling to feel comfortable inside the life fame had created for her. By the summer of 1990, Gabriela Sabatini had already spent years being described as the woman who might defeat Steffi Graf when it mattered most. The prediction followed her into every major tournament. Gabriela had beaten Graf before, but Grand Slam finals carried a different weight. The memory of the 1988 US Open defeat remained close, along with the Olympic final in Seoul. Each loss strengthened the belief that Gabriela possessed the talent to become a major champion, yet lacked the final measure of confidence. At the 1990 US Open, she finally changed that story. Gabriela reached the final without losing a set. Graf stood across the net once again, still the world's most imposing player. This time Gabriela did not retreat. She attacked the net, absorbed Graf's power, and played with the freedom that had often disappeared under pressure. She won 6-2, 7-6. When Graf's final shot sailed long, Gabriela dropped her racket and covered her face. At 20 years old, she had become the first Argentine woman to win a Grand Slam singles title. The New York crowd that had admired her for years was finally watching her lift the trophy. It should have felt like release. Instead, victory created a new burden. Once Gabriela proved she could win a major, every tournament became a test of why she was not winning another. The shy young woman who once feared interviews now carried the expectations of an entire country and the constant question of whether she could become world number one. In 1991, she came painfully close. At Wimbledon, Gabriela met Graf in a final remembered for its tension rather than dominance. She served for the championship twice in the deciding set. She moved within 2 points of the title and the top ranking. Then the opportunity slipped away. Graf recovered and won 6-4, 3-6, 8-6. Gabriela remained composed during the ceremony, but the defeat became one of the most difficult moments of her career. Wimbledon had been close enough to touch. So had the #1 ranking. Neither opportunity returned. She continued winning important tournaments and finished 1991 ranked 3rd in the world. Yet the sport around her was changing. Monica Seles had risen rapidly. Graf remained formidable. Younger players arrived with greater power, while Gabriela's confidence began moving in cycles. Some weeks, she looked capable of defeating anyone. On others, the emotional strain appeared before the match was finished. Her beauty and international popularity brought endorsements, magazine covers, and attention far beyond tennis. But public fascination did not make competition easier. It made every disappointment more visible. The applause had grown louder, so had the pressure waiting when it stopped. The final years of Gabriela Sabatini's career did not resemble a graceful farewell. After winning the season-ending WTA championships for the second time in 1994, she appeared capable of beginning another successful chapter. The victory was significant because Gabriela had gone nearly 4 years without a major singles title. For 1 week, the movement looked lighter, the confidence returned, and the champion who had defeated Steffi Graf in New York seemed fully present again. But the feeling did not last. Her results became less consistent during 1995. In 1996, an abdominal muscle injury kept her away from competition for several months. She returned, but the old desire was no longer there. The training that had once given structure to her life began to feel like an obligation. Travel became exhausting. The thought of repeating the same routine for another season offered no excitement. Gabriela consulted a psychologist and tried to understand whether she was experiencing a temporary loss of confidence or something deeper. The answer arrived gradually. She had spent most of her childhood and all her adult life being prepared for the next match. At 26, she no longer wanted every decision to be controlled by a tournament calendar. On October 24, 1996, Gabriela announced her retirement in New York. She had won 27 singles titles, 14 doubles titles, a US Open championship, a Wimbledon doubles crown, 2 season-ending championships, and an Olympic silver medal. She had remained inside the world's top 10 for more than a decade. Yet none of those achievements made the decision easier for the people who had followed her. Many believed she was leaving too soon. Gabriela believed she had already given enough. There was sadness in the announcement, but there was also relief. For the first time since she was a little girl, losing a match could no longer alter the way she felt about the next morning. There would be no ranking to defend, no press conference she was required to attend, and no stranger deciding whether her career had become a disappointment. The silence after retirement frightened some athletes. Gabriela welcomed it. She had already created an identity outside tennis through her fragrance business. Her first perfume had been introduced in 1989, when few female athletes had developed international brands under their own names. The project allowed her to discover a different relationship with fame. She could participate in creative and business decisions without being judged after every point she played. The fragrance line continued long after her retirement and became one of the most enduring commercial ventures associated with a female tennis champion. But business did not completely explain the life she chose. Gabriela began spending more time traveling without a tournament, waiting at the destination. She embraced cycling, swimming, running, and later paddle. Cycling became especially important because it offered physical challenge without recreating the emotional pressure of professional tennis. She rode through mountains and participated as an amateur in experiences connected with the Tour de France. At 55, UNICEF Argentina described her as someone who still cycled through demanding landscapes, played paddle with friends, and encouraged young athletes. The change was easy to overlook from the outside. Gabriela still appeared disciplined and athletic. She remained recognizable wherever she went, yet exercise now belonged to her. There was no scoreboard, prize money, or newspaper waiting to evaluate the result. She could stop because she was tired, continue because she felt strong, or simply enjoy the road in front of her. That freedom may have been the greatest victory of her retirement. Her personal life remained guarded. Gabriela never built her public identity around marriage, motherhood, or romantic relationships. She did not have children, and she rarely allowed speculation about her private life to become part of her public story. In a culture that often demands explanations from women who choose a different path, her silence became another boundary. She had spent her youth answering questions. As an adult, she learned that she did not owe the world every answer. Her family remained important, and she maintained a close relationship with Argentina, even while dividing her time among different countries. The death of her father, Osvaldo, in 2016, brought a painful loss. He had been present throughout the early journey, helping the family navigate a sporting world that became complicated very quickly. Gabriela spoke sparingly about grief, as she did about most intimate experiences, but those who followed her understood that the people who had protected the shy young player were also growing older. Aging changed the way she looked back at tennis. For years, her career had been discussed through what she did not achieve. She never reached number one. She did not win Wimbledon after serving for the championship in 1991. She finished with one Grand Slam singles title, despite possessing the ability to win more. Time made those judgments feel smaller. In 2006, Gabriela was inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Steffi Graf presented her, transforming one of tennis history's most demanding rivalries into a moment of affection and respect. They had met 40 times, with Graf winning 29 matches and Gabriela 11. No other player defeated Graf as often as Gabriela did. The numbers that once seemed to measure Gabriela against her rival now showed how consistently she had challenged one of the greatest champions the sport had known. Their relationship also survived the competition. In later years, Gabriela described her matches with Graf as the best of her career. What the public once saw as tension had matured into friendship. They shared exhibitions, ceremonies, and memories that belonged to a period when women's tennis was shown in living rooms around the world, and major finals felt like national events. In October 2025, while serving as an ambassador at the Mallorca Women's Championships, Gabriela again spoke warmly about those encounters and supported a tournament designed to give emerging players greater opportunities. She also devoted time to causes involving children, education, inclusion, and women in sport. Her work has included support for UNICEF initiatives, Special Olympics projects, and organizations using athletics to help young people. UNICEF Argentina has recognized her as a longtime supporter of campaigns for children and adolescents, as well as an advocate for greater opportunities for female athletes. Gabriela did not return to tennis because she regretted leaving. She returned because she had finally found a way to participate without losing herself. At 56, she is not living a tragic life hidden from the public. The emotion in her story comes from something quieter. A girl who was frightened to speak became one of the most recognizable women in sports. A champion who once carried the hopes of an entire country eventually accepted that she could not spend her whole life satisfying expectations. She stepped away before the sport made the decision for her, then built a life measured by health, friendship, freedom, and usefulness rather than trophies. The applause ended 3 decades ago. Gabriela Sabatini kept moving. Perhaps that is why people still feel such tenderness when they see her today. They are not only remembering the US Open trophy or the silver medal in Seoul. They are remembering the person they were when they watched her. A Saturday afternoon in front of the television, the sound of a tennis ball on a summer court, the elegance of that backhand, the hope that this time she might finally defeat Graf. Gabriela grew older. So did the people who admired her. And when those 2 generations meet again even briefly, it feels less like seeing a retired athlete and more like finding an old friend who quietly chose a good life. What do you remember most clearly about watching Gabriela Sabatini play? Share that memory in the comments, and subscribe and give the video a like so we can continue preserving the stories of the athletes who made an unforgettable era of sports feel alive.